last of 6 weeks on this series called Now What? And now what is important to us? Now what? It's a question that we ask when Moses led them to the promised land, to the river, and all of a sudden, what's next? Now what? What do we do? What's the next steps? How are we going to make things happen? So we've been doing this for several weeks, and the first thing we looked at was, number one, stay calm and hold your breath. It'll be okay. The second week we said, when you fall down, get up. They'd been there before and failed. Now they weren't going to fail again. When you step into the river, trust your heart. When you pick up a stone, and we talked about that, we passed those out. Remember the events of your life, how God has been faithful to you. And then last week, as soon as they got into the promised land, they crossed the river, the bread from heaven that they'd had for 40 years stopped. Why? Because up till that point, they needed it to survive. Now they were in the land flowing with milk and honey. And guess what? When you live in the land flowing with milk and honey, don't expect everyone to give you everything you want, because that is called in our society enablement. Let God take care of you. So the thing last week was, when I can't, God will. But when I can, God won't. And you understand that simply says God expects us to grow up and take responsibility for our lives. Today, now what? And that's the one you have in your hand. We'll talk about that at the end. But in Joshua chapter 5, beginning with verse 13, listen to what it says. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "Well, what message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now we fast forward to the next chapter. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its kings, and its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have the priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. But on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priest blowing their trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then all the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." It's interesting today as we look at this teaching. Getting to the promised land took them 40 years. And we've been 5 weeks just trying to get them across the river. So we finally got them across the river. But getting there was one thing, staying there is something else. Now they had battles to fight, fortified cities to conquer. There were trained armies to defeat. It seems like they go through all this stuff just to get to where? To where there's something else. You know, it's one thing to become a Christ follower, but it's another to remain positive and affirming. It's one thing to step into the river, but it's another to live in the promised land. It takes continual guidance and grace to live in the land of blessing. Which leads me to this phrase: if it's not one thing, it's another. You ever hear that? So it's a common expression. Someone told me last night, and I said earlier, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. Sometimes it is your mother, but it's always something. It's a common expression, usually of frustration for something that has happened to you. And it's one thing to get across the Jordan, but now to face Jericho, and not just a city of people, but a walled up city, that's another thing altogether. Have you ever felt this? That just the time you have a situation under control, another one shows up. Just about the time you get one child straightened out, there's a second one. Just about the time you get your husband straightened out, never been there, have you? My wife hasn't either. But there is always going to be some obstacle in life. But here's the point I want you to understand. If you think life is without obstacles, I want to change your thought process today. There will always be an obstacle in your life. I was talking to a couple recently about their potential job change for a husband. They said, he's lost his job, but we're not worried about it. It's just a kink in life that has to be worked out. And when you're finished working out the obstacles of life, you realize that the challenges are a part of life, and should be considered positively with fear, positively rather than with fear and a headache. I had a friend of mine years ago in church. It's a little lady, she was my treasurer, and this was in a North Florida small church. And she would look at me, and it didn't matter what was going on, she'd say, "Nobody knows." I said, "Well, what's going on?" "Well, I have company come visit. Nobody knows." Or, it's just, but, if you're familiar with Eeyore, she was a modern day Eeyore. But just all these problem after problem after problem. Life is just this life of misery. But let's change our perspective today. Life's plan for us is not the path of least resistance. The children of Israel wandered through the desert, then deliberately crossed the Jordan, and immediately, if it's not one thing, it's another. There's always going to be one thing or another in our lives. I've heard me say it in disgust. If it's not one thing, it's another. Today, I'd rather pause, take a deep breath, and hear me say, life continually creates opportunity after opportunity. And it's all about my choice. I can choose to look at it as Eeyore. I can choose to look at it as, thanks for noticing. Or I can choose to say, it's just opportunities. Joshua reflects on the next phase of the conquest, and he steps out to ponder the situation. Now, join with me. Here's the leader. He sees what's happening. I'm going to step back and think about what we're going to do. The Hebrew word says he was near Jericho. He was contemplating, and all of a sudden, this guy shows up with the sword in his hand and a messenger from the Lord. And he basically asked him, "What are you here about? Are you for us? Or are you for our enemies?" What he really is saying is, "Whose side are you on?" And he replied, "I don't choose sides. I'm here to let you know that God is here." I used to pray, "God, help me, help me, help me." And now I'll switch that and simply say, "God, help me to be what you want me to be." Instead of don't bless what I'm doing, help me to do what you're blessing. I love sports. Football season's here. Everybody's excited. We're getting ready for the Bucks to win a game. It's going to be a great year. But in a football game, whose side is God on? Both sides are praying. And the answer is not neither. The answer is both. He says, "Whose side are you on?" He said, "Look, let me answer the better question. Is God here?" And the answer is, take your shoes off, because you're standing on holy ground. See, the message for us today from this story is God is always near. And we may be in the process of rivers and journeys and stones and all the different things that come to get us where we are, but take a moment and relax and take a deep breath and realize that God is with us, and that's a powerful thing. Now I want us to examine the walls in the story. It goes about the walls of Jericho, very important part of the story. And I've been to Jericho, and I've been to Jerusalem, and I've been to a lot of different places, but I've seen lots of places with walls. The city of Jerusalem, though, was a walled city, even to this day. And it's like going back in time. Actually, there were older walls, but they've been torn down and reconstructed. The ones that are there today look ancient, but they were built in about 1500s. You say, well, that's not that old. It's older than anything here, but in that arena, it's not that old. But the walls of Jericho were similar, very secure. But there's lots of famous walls. The Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, the Western Wall of Jerusalem, the big foundation of the temple. There's Hadrian's Wall in England, the Great Walls of Zimbabwe, the Wall of Babylon. Before we tear down all the walls that need to be torn down, we need to first say, well, there's different types of walls, right? Not all walls have the same function. Why is it that humans even create walls? Fear? Protection? Exclusion? Maybe. Acquisition? I want to keep all my stuff behind the wall. Construction? Every building has walls, doesn't it? What are these over here? These are walls. They serve a function. It's not that all walls are bad. Sometimes they're here to hold the roof up. And we need that in the weather that we're in now. We need the roof. So walls serve a function. The walls define space. Walls define possession. But some walls define countries. Some are about protection. You ever been to the Alamo or Fort DeSoto or maybe in Fort, in St. Augustine? The forts around the state of Florida, or even Egmont Key has some fortress there. Some walls are to keep people out, and some walls are to keep people in, like jail. We want to keep them there. But there are also walls that do damage, and some walls do good. What are they? Walls that exclude us, when we're on the outside looking in, are probably not the best walls for us. There's some walls that block you from stepping up, and maybe it's fear or anxiety, from stepping up and being the best version of you. Keep you from stepping up and having a full life. There are walls of impossible situations, failing health, poor economy, trying to change someone else. There's also psychological walls. And some of those are beneficial. In counseling, some people build a wall to cope with reality. Some have been so damaged, even by sexual abuse, that they create another persona. Their only existence is, I have to wall off that damage in my life so I can continue to live. And some have done that many times, therefore multiple personalities in counseling. But there's some walls that are barriers to a greater life, and some are beneficial. We need at least identify what those are. But what do? We come up against a wall that needs to be overcome. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about there's walls that keep you from being the best version of what you can be. And I want to give you 3 tips, 3 helps when you come up against that kind of wall. And they're in your notes. Let me give you the first one. When we come up against the wall, keep positive. Verse 7, he said, and he ordered the people to advance. What he really saying is, when you come up against the wall that you need to get through, don't give up. All of us will face at least one Jericho in our life. Jerichos are walls based on fear, not based on faith. Jerichos, these massive walls that are very similar to some of the ancient walls that I've seen in the area of Jerusalem. I've seen the excavation of the walls of Jericho. Didn't see the walls, they're not there. But I've seen the excavation where the walls were. I've been to Masada, a huge fortress in the southern part of Israel, where King Herod was so paranoid that the people were going to revolt. He built a getaway. If something happens, take me to Masada. And it's a big mountain with a fortress built down inside of it. He built it out of fear. It appeared impossible to conquer Jericho, but the walls fell eventually. The key words, advance, which means get near the wall. Have you ever heard the expression, he's up against the wall? It means no more backing up. You need to take a stand now. The Israelites had crossed Jordan. They'd spied out the land. They'd consecrated themselves to God. Joshua was leading them. They came to this heavy fortified city. They saw an impossible situation. What were they told? Get close to it. Advance. Walk toward it. Get near the wall. Which leads me to number 2. Second tip. Silence is a requirement for listening. I just want you to think about that. Some people need to let this sink in. Verse 10, do not say a word. I have 4 sisters. If you think Jericho was an impossible task, this verse would be an impossible task. Do not say a word. We're to walk around the wall, though, quietly, silently, until it changes. They just don't talk. Did that affect the wall? Did it affect the structure of the wall? No, it is part of their obedience. Walking around the wall did not appear to directly affect the wall. What was the purpose of walking around it? Because they couldn't walk through it. They couldn't walk over it. They couldn't walk under it. They could walk away from the Jordan River at flood stage. Now think with me a minute. Go walk around the wall and don't say a word. But I need to talk. Just keep silent. I walk around the wall and I see the fortress. I see these heavy walls and I see this group, and all of a sudden I have an idea. I want to share it with Joshua. This is my own add-in. Just me, I'm in there with him. I say, Joshua, I got an idea. Let's skip Jericho. What do you think? I mean, this is a fortified city. There are other cities that aren't so bad. Let's skip this one. Let's come back later. Let's get some things done. And Joshua, why can't I talk when I walk? Why do I have to be silent? Here's the point. Sometimes when you face obstacles, you cannot talk them away. Many times, we just need to be silent and walk around it. It's a story of a man and woman who loved each other. And the wife loved God, and she didn't want to be pushy about her faith to her husband. And she made this decision with herself that she would never badger her husband about God or going to church about anything. She simply decided she would live a Christ-like life in front of him. One day he said, I got to tell you, you're a wonderful woman, but in the face of all the adversities of life, your response is amazing to me. Do you have a secret? He said, yeah. I follow a guy, his name is Jesus. And when I follow him, it seems like my heart begins to change and I become a better version. See, she walked around the wall till it changes. Keep silent, pray, understand God is with us, which leads me to the third point. Don't give up. Keep walking. Keep doing what you know is right. Keep walking around the obstacle until it falls. Faithfulness is following the truth for our lives. Faithfulness is repetition, doing the right thing repeatedly. Faithfulness, though, leads to expectation. And when faced with an impossible situation, walking near, stopping the conversation, and waiting. And then in verse 16, Joshua says, when you hear the horns blow, then I want you to shout and see what happens. So how many times do they walk around the wall? Once a day for 6 days, and then 7 times on the 7th day. 13 times they walked around the wall. Now here's my question. How many times have you walked around an obstacle but you stopped at 10? Or maybe 11. 12 would not do. There are times we need to walk around the wall in silence and keep walking until it falls. Some walls cannot be talked down. Some issues cannot be talked away. Some things cannot even be prayed away. We need to be faithful. Walk the walk. Be faithful, sometimes in silence. We're to keep doing what we know is right to do and just wait. Well, Pastor, that sounds pretty tough. It is. There are another words for it. It's called be patient. Wait on God. After 13 times around the wall, the priests began the long blast of their trumpets. That was the signal they waited for. And after the 13th lap, the silence was broken. All the people shouted, and the walls tumbled down. Now, some scholars question this. Say, everybody shouted. What really happened? Well, it says the walls tumbled down. That's one view. Some say the people in that city saw them for day after day after day, and they got anxious. And on the 7th day, they walked once. Is this the same thing? No, they're walking again. They're walking again. They're not saying anything. Have you ever noticed how sometimes just someone not saying anything can drive you nuts? I mean, it can happen. And all of a sudden, after the 13 times walk around, on the 7th time on the 7th day, then they screamed. How would you like to have been in Jericho and watching that whole thing? I think some guy said they probably just were terrified and dropped everything and ran out the back door. And the walls came down because they knocked them down themselves. Well, whatever. I don't really care. You can believe a variety of things. So what difference does it make? It does not make a difference, but the anticipation and the lessons of the story are the same. What are the lessons? The obstacles in life take time and obedience to overcome. We're to keep advancing, keep silent. We're to follow the direction of God for our life. When 19th century George Mueller, he was director of an orphanage, he was asked the secret to his success. He said, as I look back on my life, I see that I was constantly brought to a crossroads, which demanded a choice of which way I should go. I believe the key to my success is that I seem to have consistently chosen the least traveled path. So today, what are you saying, Pastor? This. I need for you to consider whatever obstacle in your life, that it become an opportunity. Fair enough? So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell the closing story with you seated because it's long. In the fall of 2005, we attempted to get property rezoned at Suncoast Community Church. We bought this property in 2003. In 2005, we're under construction. We're trying to get a middle school that was created, meeting another location. A charter school, trying to get the school to meet in our facility when it was built. So we built this building to accommodate a school. All the plans were drawn for that. But we had to go to the county and get special exception for the zoning to allow a charter school to coexist with a church. I went to all the county commissioners in advance. They all said, it's a good idea. I'll be for it. But when it came down to it in the meeting, they all said no. And 100% unanimous voted against the charter school being on this campus. I was disappointed. This was the plan. They said, what are you going to do? You got all these buildings designed, but I don't have enough money to finish the building. What we decided to do is finish this building and a portion down the front, but not do either of the wings because we didn't have enough funding. So we just kept going. And I was disappointed. First, I was disappointed because the charter school needed the space. They were growing rapidly and they needed a better campus. Secondly, I just thought always it'd be good to share space with a school. We'd been in the school system for 9 years. We use it on the weekend, they use it during the week. It's shared space. We thought it was a good idea. But along the way, something happens when you're renting a school and paying all that money out, and you're trying to build a campus and a building and you're paying all this money out. I begin to see the bank accounts go down and down and down because we're really living in two places. We're living there paying rent and we're trying to build it, paying payments, and it takes a long time to build a campus. And I remember one time specifically that I went to my wife and I said, sweetie, I think we need to maybe take a second mortgage out on our home. And she said, I'm okay. So I went to the bank and I got a second mortgage on my home. And I took that money, it was, just to let you know, it was $420,000. Took the $420,000, so the church needs it. We put it into the church account, 100%. I thought, well, now I have 2 mortgages. But this will give the church enough money to survive. We'll grow a little bit, it'll be fine. Because here's the thing, folks, I'm all in. 2 days after I made that deposit, I got a call from the principal. He said, you need to check a statute. I said, what statute? 1002.33 Florida statute. I said, what does it say? And I checked it out. The statute said that charter schools, now this had happened the summer before, this was February, so 8 months before, they'd passed a statute about charter schools that said charter schools can meet in certain locations without zoning changes. You can meet at a university, you can meet in a library, or you can meet at a church. And you don't need your county's permission. Folks, I can tell you, that had been on the books for 8 months. We never saw it. 2 days after I said, God, I'm putting my foot in the river. I've been walking around this wall long enough. I put my foot in the river. And as soon as we made the deposit, I get the call. And we find out the church and school can coexist. That next morning, when the realization hit me, I live in a house that has a barn in the back. And in that barn I have a study. And I walked out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm an early riser. And I walked out on the sidewalk back to go to that study. And the realization hit me of what was happening in my life. And this lyric, the Casting Crowns lyric was going through my head. And let me read the lyrics for you. Oh, what I would do to have the kind of faith it takes to climb out of the boat I'm in onto the crashing waves. To step out of my comfort zone to the realm of the unknown where Jesus is. And he's holding my hand. But the waves are calling out my name and they laugh at me, reminding me of all the times I've tried before and failed. The waves, they keep on telling me time and time again, boy, you'll never win. You'll never win. But the voice of truth tells me a different story. The voice of truth says, don't be afraid. The voice of truth said, this is for my glory, and out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. Boy, that day on my way to the study, that was in my head, and I ran into somebody out on the sidewalk. Metaphorically, Jesus. I remember realizing this. The voice of truth says, you can't do it, you can do it, but when you put your foot in the water and it begins to part, you need to give God thanks and praise. That day, I just sort of laid down out there and just wept. I had one of those God moments in my life to realize that, God, this is not about me. This is about you. Today at Suncoast, we have a great charter school that meets here. They have 770 students that come in and out of our facility. And this week, in all the rain, we saw every one of them. But it's amazing. We have a facility of 55,000 square feet. We have all these great things in our life. How does this happen? It happens when you trust your heart and you let all the obstacles become opportunities. So I don't know what obstacles are in your life, but I do know this. With God, every one of them can be overcome. Would you stand, please? I'm going to say a prayer for you. And if you want to stay and pray up front, there's someone who would pray with you. But let me say a prayer. Father, thank you for your goodness and grace. Thank you for overcoming the obstacles in our lives. Forgive us for the times that we try to short-circuit the process. And sometimes we miss great opportunities. But open our hearts to more of you today, because we know you are here and you are for us. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Hey, God loves you today. So do I. Thanks for coming.